Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to a slightly late version of FreeThought Hour. I don't think it matters because most of our viewers are as podcast viewers, not live viewers. It's just that we won't have the benefit of your lovely comments. There was a hiccup, a technological contretemps between UK and Sweden, where Swedish Steve is. Hello, Steve. Welcome.
Hello. How the devil are you?
No, come on. You're stealing my catchphrase now. And anyway, we're doing something a bit different because we don't have a live guest. So what we have is a recorded guest who is the well-famed Dr. Dino, Kent Hovind. Okay, you know, he runs a dinosaur theme park, I suppose you'd call it, in the US, and he's a well-known creationist, an out and out. I'm not sure whether he's young Earth or he's young Earth creationist. So he thinks the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and he's got a theme park to prove it. Anyway, how did this come about? Well, I bumped into a certain Brett Keane in one of the, I don't know, Twitter or Facebook social media platforms, and had some exchange with him. And then he invited me on his show. And this was quite late one evening. I was ready to go to bed, to be honest. But it turned out, so I actually was in bed. And I got out of bed, put a shirt on, no trousers, but you don't need to know that. And I appeared live on his show. I say live because it's a radio show mostly, and he doesn't show his face. He's got a JPEG with him in dark glasses, a moon against a dark sky, and the whole thing is meant to look spooky and comes out as rather silly. So anyway, he's I think it's a clue, the way he presents himself, that he wants to be somebody who is dark, at the very least, dark. And the thing about his show is that it goes on and on and on. And after about an hour and a half on my first appearance on his show, I gave up and I went back to bed. But he told me that he could introduce me to Kent Hovind. So I accepted that opportunity. I've always wanted to meet this guy and work out how his brain works. So what we've done, I went back on the show, met Kent Hovind, and thanks to the wizardry of Swedish Steve, we recorded it, recorded it, and we've chopped it so that instead of having to listen to a barrage of Kent, which is a technique that he uses, it's called in the trade, it's called Gish gabbling, because it was a tactic adopted by the late, not very lamented, Duane Gish, who was an apologist who simply didn't stop talking. He swamped his listeners, his antagonists, his people he was debating, with misconception, falsification, misunderstanding, fallacy in a continuous stream, so that you were left bemused. I could have dealt with that one. I could have dealt with that one. I could have dealt with this one, but he didn't give me a chance. And now I've forgotten what the first one was. So the whole thing is an attempt to destroy genuine debate. Okay, so this is me encountering that tactic as expounded by Kent Hovind. Again, this arrangement was fixed to be in the middle of my night. So it wasn't very social. And of course, what happened was I actually fell asleep. And luckily, I happened to wake up in the middle of the night, which, you know, men of my age tend to do sometimes. And I found that they were still on, although I'd missed my appointment. That was at 1 a.m. and it was now, by then it was 2:30. I was able to join in this marathon radio show. And I did, but of course I was grumpy, I was tired. And looking back at it now, I appear to be slow-witted, but wouldn't you be? Hey, I mean, this is the middle of the night, you've just woken up and you're expected to cope with this barrage. Anyway, the idea here is to screen the Kent myself encounter and stop it periodically so that I can give a better response to his nonsense. Okay, so do you want to put that up, Steve? Something's happening, nothing's happening. Add to stream, there you go. Okay, so we've got me and Kent. So what we can do, if you start playing it and then when you get the first black screen, stop and I'll tell you what I would have said if I had a chance. Okay, we've got no sound now. Let me unmute. We got no sound, Steve.
I think there had to be a designer. There had to be a designer for this ink pen.
Yeah, can you spool it back to the beginning so that, because I want to make the point that he keeps repeating himself.
I think there had to be a designer. There had to be a designer for this ink pen.
Okay, well, you're right. And we know there was a designer for that ink pen. In fact, I designed a pen myself and got it developed and onto the market. And I could still show you videos of this product that was definitely man-made and man-designed. So giving an ink pen as an example of design it's not relevant. You know, what we're trying to show is whether natural things were designed, and we know that that wasn't. It was man-made.
A simple screw, a nut, a bolt, a nail.
Okay.
Everything has the most complex machine in the entire universe is the human body. More complex than all the space shuttles and all the fancy machines in the universe. And they want to think nobody designed it. That is just a level of stupidity that I can't comprehend.
Oh, thank you for the insult. I love it when theists insult us because they can't understand what we're trying to explain to them. He's right. Complexity exists. But the fact that it does exist is not evidence for anything other than the existence of complexity. You know, you can't go from there to any outcome like it must have been designed. God must have done it. You can't. That is a non sequitur fallacy. And of course, simplicity also exists. Both simplicity and complexity are visible in the living and the non-living arenas. Hydrogen is simple, but the Giant's Causeway is a complex formation. Bacteria is simple, octopuses are complex. So the fact that there's a range of complexity, simplicity, doesn't mean anything more than there is a range of complexity. But people don't argue that because simplicity exists, therefore my God done it, because when it's put that way around, even they can see that it's an invalid argument. It's actually a non sequitur. There's no connection between the observations and the claim. And when somebody keeps repeating the same mistake, which is what you're going to hear Kent go on to do, it becomes clear that it's a failure of their imagination. And that has a name too. That's called the fallacy of personal incredulity. So let's hear a bit more of him.
How can you possibly, if I said I want you to explain how this ink pen came to be, but you cannot use man as your answer?
Well, why can't we? I mean, that is the answer. We know that pens were man-made. I don't know why he thinks this is an argument. We're not That isn't the subject. You're not claiming that pens are man-made. You're trying to claim that you're God-done nature.
Well, I've already taken off the logical answer by my premise. And the atheists want to say, we have to explain how the universe got here, but we can't use God as our answer.
Well, that's not true. That's a straw man argument. We don't rule out God. Nobody could rule out God. How would you do that? You'd have to search the entire universe and say, there's no God here. And worse than that, the people who do believe in God, they claim that he's outside or beyond or immaterial. So there's no prospect of ever establishing that there isn't one. Thanks for coming, Paul. I haven't given up. No, we're just late. As I explained a few minutes ago, we had technical hitches, but we've got it sorted now. Steve is in control. Let's listen a bit more to Kent Hovind.
There's no way to explain the universe within the universe. You have to go outside. Somebody who is outside of time, space, matter created time, space, matter. I don't have a problem believing that.
Well, I do, because in order to create something that's causing something, you need time. There is a gap between a cause and an effect. That gap is the progress of time. And before the universe, assuming that we're right with our assumption that time began at the same time as the universe began, there was no time for any creation event to happen. And of course, you can use the same argument. Creating something needs space too. And if space didn't exist until after it had been created, then it can't have been created. It doesn't make sense.
Now, I don't force everybody else to believe like I believe.
That's
the only logical answer. I believe God made the world. I believe God wrote a book and told us how he did it. I believe the Bible is scientifically accurate.
Well, you can see me refuting the claim that the Bible is a useful source of information in another video, which I did when I debated Nick Peters a few weeks ago. And that's also in this channel in one of our playlists. So have a look at that. We can put it in the details underneath.
I just have to say that your come on, I'm dying heading while he speaks are just lovely.
Yeah, well, you can see how frustrated I was getting.
Yeah, it's like oh. I understand you.
It's being swamped by nonsense and not being allowed to explain why it's nonsense.
Yeah,
so I was losing the will to live. Yes.
Yeah, I understand.
I think there was a worldwide flood that made all the layers that we see in the world. The atheists, their Bible is the geologic column, which does not exist anywhere. You cannot find any place where all the layers of the earth, all the layers are the same age. They say the top layer is younger. I say, where'd it come from? Outer space?
Well, of course, he's going on to give an example here of sedimentation. He's got one of those sand shaking in a liquid gadget, and he's ignoring the fact that happens rapidly. So he's claiming that all the layers form at once. Well, they don't, of course. Even in his example, the heavy ones sink to the bottom first and the light ones land on top of it. And however he turns it round, it's never going to come out a different way, because sedimentation is sequential. And why he thinks I can tell you, he thinks that there should be an entire geological column somewhere. Well, what's the chances of that? The geological column relies on exposed faces like cliff edges or canyon sides where the layers have been eroded away and we can see them. And there's no getting away from the fact that heavy things sink first. And the sedimentary rocks were formed in water. He's going to show you. Let's have a look at his gadget. It's like a toy.
What do you mean the top layer is younger? We shake this thing up and make a bunch of layers all the time. All the layers are the same age. They're all in there at the same time. If you shuffle a deck of cards, is the top card younger? No. The geologic column does not exist anywhere. It's logically stupid.
What was the chances of shuffling a deck of cards so that a shuffling of a card is not an analogy for the formation of the geologic column? Shuffling is a different activity than sedimentation, which is falling down through a liquid and landing at the bottom and piling up. Think of it as a layer cake. You know, you build the bottom layer first, it's a big one, and then you stand the middle sized one on top of that. It comes later, and then the top one goes on. If you've ever seen a wedding cake, you'll know that's a much better analogy for sedimentation. But did you see his toy? And however you shake it and turn it up, it's going to be black, gray, white, or whatever colors there were for the sand it contains.
So what you're saying, that wasn't a science tool of.
It wasn't a valid analogy. No, it's just a toy that he's got hold of and thinks he's using it usefully.
To believe that the layers are different ages, and there's no such thing as a fossil record. There's a lot of fossils in the ground, trillions and trillions of them, but it's not a record. None of them have a date stamped on them. None of them can talk. There's not a fossil record. There are fossils. There's not a geologic column. There are layers to the earth, and they're just as easy to explain by hydrologic sorting as by any other. The idea that the layers are different ages is simply not true. Baloney. So the premise that evolution is built on is that nobody designed it.
Well, of course, that isn't the only premise that evolution is built on. There's evidence for evolution from lots of strands, many different areas, and it keeps coming in. I mean, viruses, we've recently had experience of them. Have we noticed that they evolve? Yes, they keep mutating. We have to keep thinking of new ways of defeating them. But what was it he said about the geologic column not being dated? Fossils not being, they are dated, not with calendar dates, of course, but radiometrically. We have very, very good means. It's not, people tend to think of carbon dating. We don't use that for fossils. The half-life of carbon-14 is too short. It's very good for archaeology because it can date things that were left behind by earlier populations of man, as we've only been around for a couple of 100,000 years, and the half-life of carbon-14 is about 50,000 years, so it's useful for the period of civilization, okay? Not pre-civilization, but civilization. But in paleontology, we use other ticking elements which have a much longer half-life, and that way we can get a fairly accurate estimate of the ages of the fossils. And just to make sure that we're not getting it wrong, we can use 3 different radiometric ticking elements very often for the same fossil, and they will give us estimated ages that overlap, and we can say that this one is probably the most likely date. Poor boy needs educating.
Nobody designed this ink pen. That's their premise. Nobody designed this amazing human body. That's so ridiculous in my book. One cell in your body, one cell is more complex than the whole country of England. Go ahead.
Yeah,
all right.
there he goes.
Throw out some questions, see what you...
Straight back to complexity. That's what he did. Why have you full screened me, Steve? What I could say to fill in while Steve gets the right place in the video is that he doesn't seem to listen to what anyone else is saying. You could refute complexity as a reason to think that God done it 100 times, and he would still keep coming back. See this ink pen? It must have been designed. And your cell is even more complicated. So that must have been designed too. The fact that we know the pen is and that we don't know the origin of the cell doesn't seem to enter his head.
All right, let me throw out some questions, see what you guys do with it. We'll let Mr. Richards respond first. The first question is it your belief that all matter, time, space, nature, and eventually the singularity that would create the great expansion of our universe did this without any form of intelligence? You first, Mr. Richards.
Well, first of all, I want to, can you hear me now? Yeah? Yeah, good. I've checked my echo cancellation button. It was always on, as it always is. So I don't know why it was echoing. It doesn't seem to be now, so that's good. So I've just been swamped with a tirade of nonsense, I'm afraid. And before I get into your question, I want to blow back on that. So, Kent, you said that you don't understand why atheists have channels, because if we don't believe in a God, why would we have a channel about it? That's a very good question. And you could apply that reasoning to your claim that atheists do bad things for no God, because of course that's also nonsense. Nobody would want to please no God by their actions. So what you've just done there is, oops, I don't know what's going on. Yeah, he doesn't like the fact that we have channels, that we have groups, you know, Atheist Alliance International, Atheism UK, because he thinks that if we don't believe in a God, there's no reason to have a channel about it. Well, there is. There's very much a reason, because unfortunately, religions do a lot of harm, and they're based on a false premise that there is a God, because there's no evidence for that. And that's what we want to get out. That's the message. We want to keep saying, give us your evidence and let people know that there isn't any. That doesn't mean that there's no God. It's not the same thing. We can't, as I said earlier, we can't eliminate God. It's just that without evidence, he's not a very strong contender. Oh, come up the other side. What you've just done there is undermined the common theistic claim that atheists do something because they don't believe in your God, because it doesn't make sense. And putting up that meme contributes nothing to the conversation, because that's just a claim. And Stalin didn't do the atrocities that he committed because of no God any more than anyone did. There is no reason to try and please an agent that you don't believe in. Yeah, I've seen all these memes. Take them down and let me address the issue here, please. Okay? And then, Kent, you went on with fallacy after fallacy. You mentioned you used the fallacy of personal incredulity when you said that everything's complex, therefore it must have been designed. Does that echo me again? No, it's that echo.
Only folks, we gotta kind of mute our mics whenever one person's talking, and we're gonna get that awesome feedback. Feedback's awesome with the guitar, though. You know?
Yeah.
Well, Brett, can we do one topic at a time? We're going to have 5 things going here. If you'd like to talk about atheism and doing bad things and, you know, Stalin, etc., let's finish that topic before we go on to another one.
So we talk about morality of atheists.
So why? We haven't finished talking about complexity yet, have we? Brett continually tries to change the subject, because he's a browbeater. He wants to bully the guest into apparent submission or, you know, uselessness. But what I would like to say is that if you want to get me to talk about the origin of morality, I'll do that. But can we do it properly? Not just skip from complexity to morality to who made this pen, all that nonsense.
Objective morality. Is that what we want to talk about?
Whatever's on the right, but I would like to do one topic at a time, whichever topic it is. Just pick one.
I was trying to address the outpouring of error, misconception, misunderstanding after each other that you came up with, Ken, a few minutes ago.
Well,
this isn't working very well, is it? I think I get into suggesting that he's a Gish galloper, and then he reveals that he did know Duane Gish, and obviously learned the technique. But are we stuck on him, Steve? Are we? What's the matter with the video? Is it not playing properly?
let me ask you a simple question then. How do you tell right from wrong?
Right from wrong is a judgment call based on the incident individually. Based on it's a contingency matter. There is no absolute right or wrong.
Okay.
Any act, even murder, can be assessed, evaluated as being right, depending on the occasion. I mean, if somebody is threatening to kill your child, it's right to kill them to prevent that happening. And you can't have an absolute predetermined rule about any action or almost any action. And so we determine right from wrong by the way it affects others. You know, if it causes harm to others needlessly, it's wrong.
Well, you just gave an absolute. You just said if someone tries to kill your child, it's okay to kill them. Are you absolutely sure that that is absolute?
Well, I can justify that on biological grounds because we are evolved to, as a species, to succeed. And we've done very well. There's 9 billion of us. We've populated almost the entire planet, and anywhere that's habitable, except perhaps the bed of the sea. We've even managed to set foot outside of our planet and have an international space station, and we briefly visited the moon. So we are a successful species in terms of population size and conquering of potential habitats. Now, the reason we've got there and done that is because we're a social and cooperative species, and needlessly killing other members of our own species is obviously counter to that principle. Now, I'm not saying that it's always wrong to kill. If you've got somebody who is terminally ill, it might be the right thing to do. We have that in Europe. I don't know whether you do in the States, but we have assisted dying. It started in Switzerland and it's spreading to other parts of Europe. And it's a merciful thing to do if somebody is in incurable and horrendous pain. It's right. But as a general principle, an absolute but a general principle, we want to grow the population, not diminish it. We should stop mute his mic. Leaving his mic unmuted is where all that horrible echo comes from. It even happens to Brett when he speaks. So it's obviously the source is Kent.
children that are starving and hungry, and you have lots of food, is it okay for me to kill you to get your food to feed my children? After all, you're older, your life's about done. I want to feed the younger generation. What would be wrong with that? My point would be, where's your standard for right and wrong?
Okay. Good question. It's all right for you to get my food, particularly if I agree with. Remember, the operative word here is cooperation. Okay? It's not all right for you to kill me and steal my food, because you're going to lose my cooperation if you do that. But if you ask me for my food and point to the starving children, I'm going to give it to you, because that's the humane thing to do to help grow our population. That's the principle.
Okay, so if the Queen says, you are working, earning money.
I love the way quite a lot of Americans think we're ruled by our Queen. This isn't true. The monarch has had no power, no real power, just ceremonial power for I don't know, 400 or 500 years. But the Americans haven't caught up, or many of them. Pardon the ones who have. I don't mean you.
You're going to have to give X number % of your income so that a queen can decide how to feed these other people who don't have food. And if you don't agree with that, we're going to put you in jail, which is what all taxation is. It's forced cooperation. It's not voluntary. It's forced on you. You have to cooperate to do these projects. So you have a standard in England. You're on the metric standard over there. So you have a standard. This is a centimeter. Okay, go ahead.
Don't go into one of your rants again, which opens up so many rabbit holes. Let me set you right on a couple of things. First of all, the Queen has no power. It's a weird American misunderstanding that you think we're ruled by a queen. Those days ended at least 500 years ago, right? Now, taxation, that's a completely separate issue, and we've agreed to it. We've signed up to it because we voted in a government that told us it was going to do that. So this is not the same issue. What you're doing is muddying the water.
Should we maybe say that Dr. Dino has been in jail for tax evading?
Yes. Several years in jail for tax evasion. It might be a tender subject to him. He doesn't like taxes. No.
Well, I think everybody would agree that complex things, so nobody's ever observed them come into existence on their own. Nobody's ever observed even a simple ink pen come into existence.
Okay, we got that. You did your ink pen thing earlier. Right. What do you mean?
Explain how this came to be without using man as your answer.
Well, that's a ridiculous request, because we know how that came to be. It's man-made.
Very good. Very good. So explain how a single cell came to be. A single cell, more complex than the space station. How did it come to be without having a designer?
Okay, well, here's the answer. You're not going to like it, but this is it. We don't know.
So we just don't know.
We just don't know. That's correct.
I love that clip. I can't resist that Patrick Moore clip. We just don't know.
Yeah, you could have been nice and told me about it before.
Yes. I couldn't find it last week, but I have now.
Oh, it's lovely.
Then why do we teach it to the kids in school like that's part of science?
We don't teach it to kids at school. What we teach is evolution. Now, evolution is not, please listen to this, it's important. It's not an explanation for the origin of life. What evolution is an explanation for the diversity of life. Okay? We don't yet have an explanation for the origin of life. We're working on it. Be patient.
Okay.
I go on to explain that there's sort of three speculative propositions that are in the frame. Creation is one of them. Abiogenesis is another, and there's also panspermia. But and Kent doesn't understand that. He keeps calling it transpermia. Carry on, play, Steve.
Something I don't understand why non-believers continue to say that abiogenesis or spontaneous generation has nothing to do with evolution, and the very definition.
Can I stop it there, please, Steve? Because what he's done is he's mashed together two different things: abiogenesis and spontaneous generation. They're not the same. Spontaneous generation was an idea that used to be popular, I don't know, 200 years ago. And it was because they noticed that if you left a bowl of soup out, it went rotten. And eventually flies came and flew out of it. And their explanation at the time, historically, was that the soup had spontaneously given rise to flies' eggs, fly maggots, and eventually adult flies. That was spontaneous generation. Another name for it is biogenesis. Not abiogenesis, but biogenesis. And it's because Louis Pasteur established that the reason that bowls of broth go moldy or rot is it's not because of spontaneous generation or biogenesis, life coming out like in Genesis, being created. It's not because of that, but it's because that bowl of soup is in a world on a planet that's teeming with life. And it's bound to get infected with all sorts of things, from dust particles in the air, bacteria, molds, and yes, flies' eggs too. Anything that can be carried and contaminated will use it as a source of nutrient and grow up, turn into something. But that's not abiogenesis, which they love to mix up together with it. Abiogenesis, the A on front means without. So we've got A for without, bio for life, and genesis for creation, making. Okay? So unlike biogenesis, which Louis Pasteur showed was the explanation for food going rotten, life not being made but infecting. What abiogenesis hypothesizes, speculates about, is life began without life. Abiogenesis, from no life, from without life. So it speculates that life came about from non-life. And of course, we can't do that here because we don't have anywhere that's got non-life. It's an experiment that will be quite difficult to perform because sterility, that's quite hard to achieve. Anyway, don't mix up biogenesis, spontaneous creation, with abiogenesis, life coming from non-life. Different things.
Definition of abiogenesis, the original evolution of life or living organisms from inorganic or inanimate substances. So, I mean, that's exactly the definition.
You have the perfect face for radio, Brett. Is that why you're on a dark camera? What is this?
Well, that's me.
Okay, right.
Okay.
You're not very visible. Get yourself to look threatening. That's what he wants to do.
If he's in the dark. The textbooks do teach, in my country certainly, that life started from non-living material. The theory of organic evolution, right here on screen, golifescience.com, a new theory of organic evolution, nature.com, theories of organic evolution, how life got started. They are teaching this at taxpayer expense, and they're not including the idea there might have been a designer do it.
Okay. Let me address that. Don't go into one of your rants. Okay. One point at a time. What those textbooks are saying is not that this is established fact. They're saying that this is a speculation. There's a number of ways that life could possibly have begun on this planet. One of them is God done it, your idea, okay? Another one is called Panspermia, and that is that it came in as organic molecules from outer space, which sort of seeded the process here on planet Earth. Another one is, abiogenesis, that inorganic matter gradually became more complex in certain circumstances. There's the hot geysers under the middle of the ocean ridge, or there's the warm pools that evaporate. There are various different, but these are not known facts. These are scientific speculation, and we haven't ruled out creationism. We can't rule it out. It's in there as one of the potential explanations for how life began. If you could stop it there a minute, Steve.
Scientific.
One of the problems here is people misunderstand the meaning of theory and hypothesis. And even those textbooks that he showed us do that. They make that mistake. They proposed a theory for the origin of life. There's no such thing. A theory in scientific language, not in common language, we talk about a theory when we mean a guess. We say, it's my theory that there will be a bus along in the next 10 minutes. That's not the same theory. That's theory with a small t. In science, theory with a capital T is an explanation founded on known information, repeatable observations, that are a big mass of them, that explains various observable phenomena and makes predictions about, if the theory is correct, what should happen under different circumstances. Now, that's a theory. It's established. And the important thing to know about it is it looks back. It looks back at a mountain of information that's already been established. A hypothesis in science is something that looks forward. It's saying, if this is the case, then we'll set up this experiment or we'll do this observation, and that should happen. So a hypothesis looks to the future, whereas a theory looks to the past. And then there's speculation or proper guesses, where we've got no idea of it might be a hypothesis which has not yet been investigated. There are lots of those. We've got lots of potential explanations that we haven't found out. We haven't done the investigation to find out which of them are correct yet. Or it might even be an uninvestigable proposition, something that we can't investigate, like investigating the entire universe to find out whether there is a God in it or not. We can't do that. It's too big. So those things aren't even hypotheses, because a hypothesis has to be investigable. Those things, like there is a God, for example, are pure speculation.
Should it be included in a science? Have you ever observed molecules come together and form a living cell? It's no. Outside the realm of science. Why do we touch this?
Hang on. Okay. Don't go off. Is it scientific? That's a very good question. Is it scientific to speculate? What are you saying? that scientists are not allowed to have blue sky guesses as to what the potential explanations might be? What are you saying? Are you saying that every word that comes out of a scientist's mouth must be an established truth? Hey, that's unreasonable, isn't it?
No, it's perfectly fine to speculate. Panspermia only postpones the problem. Life started somewhere else and got transported here. That's still not answering how did life get started?
Well, I'm sorry for you, but you'll have to come to terms with the fact that, as I said earlier, we just don't know.
So we just don't know.
We just don't know. That's correct.
So we just
researching. It might happen in my lifetime, it might happen in yours, or it might not happen. We might not get the answer in the lifetime of even young the Parker. Hello, Parker.
Yeah.
Miss Parker being very quiet there. Oh, I'm supposed to speak now, am I? Yeah, notice how he said Panspermia. I love that. But what he's looking for here is an answer today. And if this conversation had happened 100 years ago, there would be more questions that are unanswered because we've discovered some answers in the intervening time. If we'd gone back 100 years, we wouldn't have observed gravity waves. We wouldn't know whether there was a Higgs boson or not. We wouldn't have landed on the moon. We wouldn't know how to make jet aircraft. What you've got to realize is that science isn't finished yet. You know, we're carrying on. We're getting more and more answers. Maybe one day we'll answer the question that you want an answer for now. Be patient.
So I can't, like you said, it's a religion. We have to have faith that it'll adjust itself.
No. That's nonsense. It's not a religion. What you have to understand here is the difference between belief and evidence. I wanted to ask you some questions, Kent. I've made notes of them in a document. Give me a minute. I'll pull it up.
Well, John, we can do some questions, but there is something that we have to kind of set up here. I've noticed that when Kent starts talking, you kind of jump right in there and over him immediately. Can you let him finish his statement and then you go?
Yeah.
So you're not even letting me finish my statement, Mr. Richards.
Yeah. Right. I'll tell you why I do that.
Mr. Richards, one at a time, please. I'm just
Okay,
asking.
yeah. I'll tell you why I do that. It's because Kent uses a technique called Gish galloping. What he does is he piles fallacy upon misconception, upon mistake, upon misunderstanding in a whole rigmarole, and I'm left behind.
Just because you don't like his view or ideology does not give you the right to just keep cutting him off. Let's have a respectful conversation.
I'm trying to. I'm trying to have a respectful interaction with Kent, but he's got to let me address each of his points at a time, not just swamp me with a load of nonsense that I've got to try and pick out one or two to react to.
All right.
He goes on to say he knew Duane Gish, who was famous for inventing the Gish gabble. Now, poor man died some years ago, but his legacy lives on in Kent Hovind.
I knew Duane Gish, that they called the Gish Gallop. It's the atheists that do this continually. The Gish Gallop, they're the ones who want to bring up 10 points like you just did. You said, well, there's several theories of how we got here. There's Panspermia, blah, you stop.
I was answering your question, Kent. There's not a single answer. I have to give you the options. You know, there's three possible. None of them's a definite answer yet. We're looking into it.
Panspermia is just the same problem. Take one topic at a time. That's not an answer. It's not a scientific answer.
Yeah, I agree. It's not an answer. Okay. If you remember, one of the first things I said in response to this particular issue was We don't know. We haven't got an answer. And we're honest and honorable to admit that. We don't know. We can speculate, but the answer hasn't arrived yet.
Here, slide number 456, okay? The textbooks teach, we do know. Mammals and reptiles and frogs and starfish had a common ancestor. This is the stuff they're teaching. You don't know that. We know. You know, Mr. Richards, all life forms come from an ancestor. They're teaching this. All names of life are from an ancestor. This is what books say. I disagree. That's not science. That's religion. We know there's 300 kinds of dogs. We know there's all mosquitoes are related. You guys teach about that. No, mosquitoes are not an ancestor. You don't know this today. But they teach about that. We're all paying for that. We're all this is for 50 years now. You're always religion. It gets exposed to the books. We're trying to go into yes, they do teach evolution. They live life. And evolution is millions of years. But they created organism. Is it science to say that? Is that religious belief?
Well, there you go. That's a typical example of a Gish gabble. I could have addressed his point. That family tree obviously came from a children's book. And yes, it may exist in American schools. I'm afraid certain American schools in the Bible Belt, Frank, you'll probably bear me out on this. I see you're watching. Thank you for being in our audience. Certain American schools have an agenda. They wish to promote Christianity, their God, and that he done it. But I'm afraid it's not scientific. Even the most up-to-date scientists do not refer to a simplistic trunk, branch, twig type of diversification of life on this planet. It's much more like a web, in fact, much more complicated than that. He stopped. I can speak. Hooray! You made your point in the very first sentence that you said, Kent. And then you went on and on and on and on, remaking it.
Mr. Richards.
What?
Well, I don't understand why you're acting like this. Kent is being nothing but respectful to you.
Oh, no, he hasn't. That's not true. Put me on screen.
Very considerate. Please work on it. Composure.
Okay. But if you remember, right back early on in this show, Kent regarded the what he thinks is it's a straw man, but he thinks the position of atheists is that everything wasn't created and therefore pens. It's so confusing. I don't know what he tries to mean, but the point is that he was bloody rude. He said the idea that things evolved was stupidity. Do you remember? We can scroll back and find it. Don't do it, Steve. Okay. So instead of letting Kent rant on and on, remaking the same point over and over again, why don't
John, I'm starting to run out of patience, sir. Please, respect.
Okay. Let's take a look at the very first thing that he put up, the tree of life. Shall we? Go right back to that.
This one, or which one would you like? This one.
That one. Oh, stop. That's the one. Okay. That's speculation. That's a very old-fashioned view of how life came to be as diverse as it currently is. Nowadays, I don't know what book you got that from, but it's obviously from a children's book.
Correct.
It's not. It's probably from an old children's book too. It's not current scientific expertise, and we don't give credibility to that simplistic picture of how life diversified anymore. That went out, I don't know how recently, but it's post-Darwin probably. Darwin came up with the original idea, I think, tree of life. But although what we can say is that we have a common ancestor, and there's very good reason for that, we can't say that evolution occurred down a trunk and then up a branch. It's much more complicated than that. So I'm not sure what you're asking me now. Are you asking me why we think there's a common ancestor? Is that what you're asking me?
No, let's make it, stay on this one point. These trees of life have been around for over 100 years. College textbooks say animals, fungi, and plants have a common ancestor. I did not put the reference to this one, which book it's from. This one is Glencoe Biology, a major publisher here in our country from 30 years ago, teaching that all the many forms of life have a common ancestor. Here's Heath Biology. I think it's the 4th largest publisher, showing humans are related to birds. So do you believe you are related to a bird?
Let's stick with the idea of a common ancestor, first of all, shall we?
Do you believe you have a common ancestor with a bird?
Yes. And do you want to know why?
I can't believe you believe that, but sure, I'd be thrilled to know why. You were taught that from kindergarten on. You got brainwashed. Go ahead.
See, it's all right for him, isn't it? He can be rude. It's just me that can't. And I don't think I was, anyway. Oh, dear. That's not respectful.
Okay.
Can I point out, Brett?
Sure.
I was not brainwashed. There's evidence. Let's take the DNA evidence, because I think you might agree that DNA is like the instruction set in a cell. That the proteins and therefore subsequently the processes are described. Okay, so if you take a look at that DNA, and we know that it works because we use it in law to identify criminals, don't we? We collect their DNA, whether it's in a fingerprint or semen or whatever, and we say there's an impossibly remote chance that this could have been left by anyone else because our DNA is all distinct, individual. Okay? Well, if you take that DNA, you will find that the instructions for key enzymes, and the enzymes, of course, are the speeders up of our biological processes. With an enzyme, all the reactions go quicker, and there are specific enzymes for each process. And if you take a look at the piece of DNA that codes for, let's take a simple example, an enzyme that's involved in the process of respiration, internal respiration, the chemical pathway that enables us to unlock our fuel, get the energy out of our fuel, which at that level is sugar, by reacting it with oxygen. That's a complex process. There's a whole series of enzymes that affect it, that make it go faster, right? If you take a look at the DNA that codes for those enzymes, you will find they're the same in organisms that go back in time. And I don't mean fossils, I'm talking about living organisms that have varying ranges of complexity. So if you look at yeast, for example, or bananas, for example, they use the same piece of DNA, very similar piece of DNA, to form enzymes which control the processes of, in this case, respiration. So the basic process of life. So that's the reason that we think there is common ancestry. And the closer you get to a species, a relationship with another species, the correspondence, the congruence between the DNA is a better match. So, for example, we're 96% the same as chimpanzees in our DNA.
Okay. One topic at a time. I understand really well what you're saying. I taught biology 15 years. Now, is there any reason to only teach students the similarity in the DNA code proves a common ancestor? Would it also be just as logical to say the same person is writing these codes, a common creator?
I had to wait all that time to be able to answer his question, which was, could it be an explanation for a common designer? And technically it could, but, and if you go back to the video, I explain why it's unlikely to be that case.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, well, what you've done there is you've made an argument from complexity and derived the conclusion, which is not a conclusion, but you claimed the conclusion that means there's a designer. And again, you've swamped me by not letting, you made your point in the first sentence of what you said back then, and I wanted to respond to it, but then you went on, and I've lost the point. I've lost the will to live, in fact. So,
Mr. Richards,
what did you say at the beginning of that little piece? You said, why do we conclude that it wasn't designed? Well, we don't. As I said earlier, creation is still in the frame. The answer is we don't know. And there are three possible explanations for how life originated. One is creation. That doesn't mean it's your God. Another one is panspermia, and another one is abiogenesis. And there could be a combination of these two. But why don't we think that your God is a likely explanation? I'll answer that question. I could have answered it after your first sentence. It's because every mystery that we have so far solved has turned out not to have a creator, deity, agent in the sky as the explanation. Every mystery we've solved, and we've solved millions of mysteries, and none of them required that explanation. So the chances of creationism being the correct explanation is vanishingly improbable. Oh, it's me again, is it? Okay. Well, I thought I did a reasonable job of explaining why it's unlikely that it's an evidence for a common designer. It's because we've never found, we've solved millions of mysteries, none of them proved to be caused by some sort of supernatural agent. None of them. So we're looking at a very, very high level of improbability that designer is the answer, and a very good chance that common origin, common ancestry is the answer.
panspermia is not an explanation for the origins of life, says Adam Lohr. Adam, if you don't mind, can you explain to Mr. Richard why panspermia is not a good speculation or answer for it?
Sure, yeah. I think Kent earlier explained this. Kent, are you able to mute?
I can mute it here. He can mute it over there. Yes, we can mute.
Thank you. I think Kent explained this earlier that, and I'm sure Mr. Richards understands this, that would just, if there was panspermia, it would just explain how life started here on Earth, but it still asks the question. You're begging the question, where did it originate in the first place?
Yep. I'm not muted. No, good. Okay. Yeah, well, you're right. And I bring you back to my original statement. We just don't know. And you're right. What panspermia does is puts it back one. It says life did begin some other way elsewhere and then came here. I accept that. But so does creation. Because, of course, creation assumes that God came, I don't know, from somewhere. All creationism does is put the the explanation back another step, the same way that panspermia does. It moves the question from how did life originate to how did God originate?
That's
Yeah,
a good
but
point.
creation isn't being put in public schools and people are not being forced to pay for it. They can go to a religious school or a church or something like that in order to learn about it, as where evolution is being claimed to be knowledge of something. And as you've articulated, you don't know. They don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, my turn. He mentioned there are three theories, creationism, panspermia, and abiogenesis. Panspermia simply postpones the problem or puts it out of reach. And the question is, do they, in your schools in England, or in, I don't know which part of the United Kingdom you're from, but do they in the United Kingdom over there give equal time to teaching the creation story, or is it all emphasis on the option number 3, that it had to happen by, I know we don't know, but yet they teach it like we do know. This one shows crocodiles and humans have a common ancestor. This one shows snakes and birds have a common ancestor.
Which is true.
This is what is taught, and this is my objection. This isn't science. This is something we believe. Biology teachers have a common ancestor with sponges. The kids look at this, they learn this, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all through grade school and high school, and they come out believing it because they've seen lines drawn on paper between animals and plants.
Mm-hmm.
This is propaganda. This is not science. If you don't know, then they shouldn't have lines on these paper and say, kids, you're going to be tested on this. Are you related to a bat? That's what they teach the kids.
Yes.
All forms of life had a common ancestor. This is what is taught. This isn't science. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I don't know whether you weren't listening earlier on, because I explained why we know that there is a common ancestor to pretty much all of life. It's because of commonality between the DNA. And yes, that is, I'm in England, and yes, that is taught. I used to teach biology to pre-university level. And yes, we do teach evolution because it's a fact. And in science lessons, we don't spend time teaching creationism because there's no evidence for it. It's like panspermia. There's no evidence for that either, except that, we found a few meteorites with some quite large organic molecules in them. That doesn't mean anything. But when I was teaching biology to pre-university level, I used to start my classes by saying, we've got another school of thought here. It's that God made everything. And so I did, and it's not disallowed in science lessons in this country. I did enter into the alternative. It's not a powerful alternative because there's no evidence. Not only is there no evidence for creation, but there's no evidence for God either. But I recognize that this is a cultural thing. And so I explained to my class that you may have heard that it was all, according to the Bible, it was all made in 7 days by, magic. And then I went on to explain what we actually do know. And what we know is the theory of evolution has got mountains of evidence, not just from fossils. I know you creationists love to poke at the fossil record, but every field of biology supports the contention that evolution is the best model for explaining things.
Okay, you said there's no evidence for creation, and we explain what we do know. We know cows produce cows. That's been observed millions of times worldwide. Okay. We know birds produce baby birds. Yep. We know humans produce baby humans. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you know birds and humans have a common ancestor? You said the DNA code. That's not an answer. Surely you see the logic in this. The similar DNA code does not prove a common ancestor. It could prove a common designer. The code is just too complex. But you just leap right over this. Well, look, birds and humans have the similar DNA code for respiration. Therefore, we have a common ancestor. That's what you taught your kids in biology class, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes. Guilty as charged.
Then you brainwashed. You didn't teach. You brainwashed students. You didn't teach at all. You brainwashed. Go ahead.
Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It's not just the evidence from the DNA. There's evidence from embryology, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry.
Don't Gish gallop on me now. No Gish galloping. That's what you guys do. Embryology. Do you really believe embryology is evidence for evolution? Is that your stand?
It depends how you interpret it. Let me explain to you. Let me explain to you. Thank you. Let me explain to you. There is a peculiar commonality between how embryos develop from a fertilized egg. Okay? They all go through 2-cell, 4-cell, 8-cell, 16-cell, 32-cell, and then they begin to look like a fetus. But initially, the fetus just looks like a slug, including us. We look like a tiny little wriggly slug after about, 5 days of gestation. And then at a later stage, we begin, maybe 7 days, we begin to take on a more human form, but we're only that big. Yet at that stage, of course, our eyes are closed. Yes, that's a good example there. But that was Haeckel's mistake. Can I finish what I was saying and then get to Haeckel's mistake? Okay. There is this commonality, as you can see, let's take vertebrates, because that's what you pictured there. They all have a tail. We used to have a tail in our mother's womb. It got absorbed. We have other features that resembled other embryologies. Now, if I gave you an embryo of a pig at a certain stage of development, you wouldn't be able to distinguish it from a human embryo because there is this amazing commonality. And the likely explanation for that is that we have a common ancestor. Now, what Haeckel did was he came up with the expression, ontology recapitulates phylogeny. Okay, you're going to find that for me?
Oh, I've got all that. Yes, I got it long. And you've already Gish galloped past about 5 points, okay? The fact that there are similarities, and you said yourself, oh, that's a good illustration. This is the fake illustration that Haeckel made. On top are his drawings. Underneath are actual photographs.
Well,
we don't
of course.
have a tail.
Of course.
But as embryos develop, sure, they go through similar stages of development. That's what works.
Mm-hmm.
It's following a code in the development.
That's your claimed explanation.
And if your claimed explanation, this proves a common ancestor.
I'm saying that the likely explanation, this is called abduction. When we're looking, you correctly said that we can't go back in time and see these things happening. But what we can do is apply reasoning that is based on what we do observe happening today, which is change happens, speciation occurs, we see it. We can apply that knowledge to chronological progressions that we can find in the past, whether they are fossil records or embryology. Now, Haeckel didn't have a camera, poor guy. He had to do drawings. And of course, naturally, they're not very good. But his mistake was to interpret that ontogeny, which is the development from an egg, recapitulates phylogeny. And that is the only error that he made. The reason it's an error is because phylogeny is a human fabrication. We've made it up. Nature doesn't have boxes. We say, you group of animals look similar. We're going to put you a box over you and call you an order, a class, a family, whatever, some sort of level of taxonomy. Okay? And that's false. Nature is really a blurred spectrum. We only do that to make it easier for us to talk about things.
I agree.
Thank you.
All right, you guys mind if I ask a question real quick? John, do you believe that you come from a millions of year old shrew, which was, according to what they call it, it was an ancient rodent? Do you believe this?
The evidence is very convincing. The alternative explanation that God went sap and created a shrew is not convincing.
Okay, so what is the evidence that that humanity came from a rodent?
The evidence is in DNA, biochemistry, embryology, anatomy, physiology, modern medicine, geographic distribution. It's
John, we're talking about a creature that supposedly existed millions and millions of years ago before humanity even existed. How are you able to compare DNA?
we in that case, for a start, supposedly existed that's a mistaken conception, because the evidence that it existed is very strong. It's not a supposed existence claim at all. And you're right, we don't have the DNA of the shrew that survived the asteroid destruction. But what we do have is evidence in other forms. We have fossilized evidence, and we have present day shrews. You know, we can look at present day shrews, but they weren't all extinguished, and so we can compare from them.
All right, that's wonderful. Kent, do you want to take over for a little bit? I got to use the rest area.
Okay. Yeah, I sit here, drink water for 2 hours. You have incredible faith to believe that these similarities somehow demonstrate to you a common ancestor, when each one of them is so unbelievably complex. I think we could look at, I'm not sure what all automobiles are manufactured in your country, but we could look at the automobiles here in America and take Chevrolet and Dodge and Ford and say they probably go through a common building process. I bet they start with the frame, and then they add the undercarriage and the body and the hood and the engine. I bet there's a similar sequence of events for how the Ford is assembled and how the Dodge is assembled and how the Chevy is assembled. I bet there's thousands of similarities.
Yeah. There you go. You see, he just wants to hog the camera and the microphone, doesn't he? He's wrong, of course, because we do know that Chevys and Dodges and Fords are designed, because we're men. We design things, you know. But he's also wrong about how it's done. He thinks that there's a chassis, and there isn't anymore. Chassis went out, I don't know, 50 years ago. The construction of a car is called monocoque now, based on how the first metal aeroplanes were designed, because it saves weight. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about here. The point is that giving us an analogy, something which we know has been designed and has gone through changes of improvement, is not evidence that nature does it the same way. In fact, the way nature does it would be ridiculous for us to adopt. And I go on, I think, to say this, that back in World War II, car designers were set to work to make aeroplanes, but they didn't take a car and turn it into an aeroplane. They started with a clean sheet of paper. That's designing. Evolution does the stupid thing. It takes the military tank and makes it into a bat. It modifies the existing.
And you mentioned about we had a tail, but we lost it because we didn't need it. Well, that is simply ludicrous. The tail bones we still have today are anchor points that allow reproduction. If you think the tailbone is vestigial, I will pay to have yours removed. Okay? You will quickly discover that was a major mistake. And it's not a vestigial leftover. It's an essential part of human anatomy. The 9 tailbones and the muscles that attach to them. So to see that the embryo growing in the mother has what appears to us to be a tail, it's just the backbone, the spine has grown first, and then everything's going to be added to it. Just like the frame of the car is put together first, and then everything's added to that frame.
Right.
This is not evidence of a common ancestor.
You've made your point. Can I come in?
Sure, please do.
Thank you. Right. As usual, you made your point in your first sentence and then just reinforced it by repetition. So let's take a look at the tail. First of all, we do have a stump of a tail. We have a few fused vertebrae, which is a remnant of it's what's the word? I can't remember now. It's vestigial, a vestigial remnant of what used to be a tail. And occasionally, you know, humans are born with tails. I don't know how common that is, but usually what happens, because the mother doesn't want to see a baby that's come out of her that has a tail, usually what happens is the delivery nurse or doctor gets hold of the baby, does a quick snip, and then says, look, you've got a boy. But let's go to cars. You talked about Dodge, Chevy, and Ford. And of course, well, you don't know about how modern cars are made, but they're not made on a frame or chassis. It's a monocoque construction. But the point is that they had a common designer. Yes, of course they did, because they're trying to meet the same remit. They're trying to give us mobility on roads. And that is best met by a solution that includes 4 wheels, an engine, a box, and a steering wheel, and some other controls. But that doesn't mean that this hypothesis, this technique applies to everything in nature. In fact, if you went into your car manufacturing factory, and this happened in World War II, a lot of in the UK, a lot of companies that previously made cars were told to make aeroplanes. But what did they do? They started with a clean sheet of paper. They didn't say, I'm going to take this Chevy and modify it until it flies, because that would be crazy. That's what evolution does. Evolution does modify the existing. And that's an argument that we weren't designed. It doesn't support your Chevy, Dodge, Ford rigmarole at all.
I agree. They did not modify the car to make an airplane. They did use tens of thousands of identical parts, nuts, bolts, screws. They were all designed. Each screw on that airplane was designed. Each screw on the car was designed. They used a common principle of an internal combustion engine at the time, till they got the jet engine, that gasoline explodes. We have to compress it, make only one part able to move. That would be the piston, turning a crankshaft. Thousands of things are similar between cars and airplanes. They did not start from scratch with the airplane.
No.
They said, okay, we know we have gasoline that explodes. Yeah, let's use that on the airplane and on the car.
Okay.
So there are, and both of them, car and airplane, were designed by a smart mind. None of them happened by themselves. You want to say this complex human body had no designer.
Yes.
The most complex thing in the universe, the human body.
Yes.
You don't believe it had a designer. I'm baffled by this. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Right. Well, again, you made your point in sentence 1. You mentioned common screws and nuts and other parts of human design. And you're right. Of course, we will redeploy useful bits when we're trying to make something new. That makes sense. What you need to notice is that those parts that you named are not found in nature. You can't go around and look for a screw. What humans do is we take natural things and we work on them to change them into the form that we like. When you find a chunk of marble, you don't see the statue inside it. That has the chunk of marble has to be worked on to get the statue out. And so everything that humans have made has signs that we made it. For example, even if you take 2 half coconuts that are used to make the sound of a horse, the sound of a horse. What you see on that is that this natural object has been sawn in half, and there are tool marks to tell you where it's been sawn in half, and that a hole has been drilled in the end and a string put through so that you can use it for the purpose of making horse hoof sounds. So what we do is we take things that are natural and then we work on them and use them to produce whatever product we're after. So, for example, if you take a car, you'll find it's full of things made of plastic. There's no plastic in nature. We've created that, and you'll find that it's got your screw, and that's a piece of threaded steel. You know, steel doesn't occur in nature. We had to make that in the first place. So things that humans made show signs that they were made by humans. They include non-natural materials and tooling, evidence of tooling haven't happened, you know, and there are other signs too. Assembly, you know, you mentioned, I don't know whether you mentioned glue and rivets, but we use fastening devices. You don't find that in nature.
All right, Mr. Hovind, as well as Mr. Richards, I'd like to show you something shortly of an atheist scientist and what he claims. You said you're looking for some kind of signature. Here you go. You'll probably recognize this guy. Here we go.
Genes are information. They are coded information. It even looks like computer information. I mean, a chromosome is a great long computer tape. It's linear, it runs one-dimensional, digital code. It's not binary, it's quaternary, but apart from that, it's just the same as computer tape. It's read in sequence. It's copied and pasted from one part of the organism to another in just the same way as a computer programmer would copy and paste. So biology has turned into computer science.
Copied and pasted from one part of the organism to another in just the same way as a computer programmer would copy and paste. As a computer programmer would copy and paste.
Did you make that sound go very deep there? Was that...
Well, I wanted to make sure that it was clearly heard, and that was Richard Dawkins,
Yeah.
the Pope of Atheism.
Well, notice, he did not address the subject. He tried to divert attention away to the deep voice. Do you believe the DNA code is similar to a computer tape or a computer code?
Yes. Does that mean that it was intelligently designed? No.
Yes, because it's a medium. The information is a medium of mind. There's nothing natural you can ascribe to information inside the genome. I'm sorry.
Okay, hold it. Now, John said that...
Wait. Can you just clarify what they mean? Like, are they talking about the DNA sequence where protein material or what are they talking about? I don't understand, really.
It's me. They're so muddled in their minds. It's the thing is that DNA. What they don't understand is the processes. DNA, first of all, has to be transcribed to RNA. Then RNA has to be read on the side of a ribosome. And at that stage, it's converted into amino acids. And the amino acids link together like the links of a chain to make a polypeptide. And then the polypeptides join together to make the first structure of the protein, but it has to undergo two further. Well, that would be the second structure. The final thing is the tertiary structure, where the protein wraps itself up according to the charges on the various pieces along the necklace and makes its shape. And only then does it take on a function. So he's groping with a complete lack of understanding of all of this. I'm going to use the word complexity, because it is complex. Doesn't mean it's been designed by his God, though. But he doesn't know what he's talking about. No wonder we can't understand him.
Yeah, I think you make their point better than they make their own point with Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
I will.
There's nothing like a screw found in nature. Is there anything like a nervous system found in nature that was repurposed for the human body? You have a nervous system that is mind-boggling, Is there anything similar to the way a nervous system works with the electrons moving up and down and transferring signals and carrying information through your nervous system? What was that repurposed from in nature?
Okay. Well, you made your point in the first sentence, and I could have addressed it there.
Let me interrupt one time. The reason I have to make the point and then make it over and over again because you don't get it.
See, more rudeness. Brett, go on. The answer is, I have a nervous system, and so do a lot of other sentient animals. There is no indication that my nervous system is in any way special, that it was created separately from the rest of the animal kingdom. Remember, that's a fabricated classification. Then you went on to explain, to reveal that you don't know how nervous systems work because you talked about electrons buzzing about or whatever you said, and that's nothing moves in nervous systems. It's called not conduction, but so don't mix it up with electrical wires. It's called propagation. It's much more like a domino rally where a message is passed along and all the components stay in place. Anyway, why do we think? I'm not sure what your question was there. Just because it's complex, is that it? You're just saying because it's complex, it can't have evolved. Is that it?
Can you tell us what the variables in the environment were that actually put the materials together to create this complex system?
Yeah, sure, I can. It's because in the early world, when the first predator discovered the taste of the first prey, it became an advantage to be able to see, even if at that stage it was only to distinguish between light and dark. Because if something dark was coming over your head, this is all in the water, by the way, nothing on land yet. Something dark was coming, it was a reason to run away because it might be about to eat you. And the earliest sentient creatures had what we call light spots or eye spots, which were little complex chemicals. These are not even dependent upon the system of the cell. You can get these complex chemicals out, and they are sensitive to light. But at that stage, it became advantageous to have senses and therefore a nervous system to communicate that information to whatever mobility system you possessed, whether it was cilia, flagella, or eventually muscles.
Well, there you go, Kent. All we got to do is have a bunch of creatures bite each other repeatedly, and we'll get our nervous system. Go ahead.
Well, he clearly demonstrated what I have been saying all along. This is a religion. You don't know any of that happened. You believe it might have happened. You said it had light spots, and in the early world, the first predator was able to see. This you should write fairy tale books.
No,
that's a fairy tale. That's not science. Nobody's ever seen this happen. Why don't we do it again? Let's get a creature with no eyesight whatsoever. Let's get a tree. You think it would be advantageous for a tree to be able to see a storm coming? Why don't trees grow eyes?
Okay.
Hey, Kent and Richard, if I grow me some bat wings, that would be very advantageous for me.
Let me deal with the tree question first of all, because what happens in the case of plants is they haven't evolved an ability to run away. They are rooted, their existence depends on some substrate. Okay?
Most of them are.
So, yes. So for them, it isn't so much a need for mobility to run away from their predator. They have to come up with alternative means, and they do this by making their leaves poisonous, for example, so that they are distasteful to the potential herbivore. But trees are sensitive. They don't have eyes. They're not as sensitive as us, but they bloody know when it's fall, and they let their leaves go at that time of year.
Okay, we have gone for 2 hours. I think we get in every one of these debates. Nowhere, but I think the people can see clearly that you have a religious belief and will not admit it. You believe strongly in this historical past, which you cannot see, and you make up a story. But just imagine it. It was an advantage to be able to see. That's imagination. You and SpongeBob need to get together and do a cartoon show. So I think we should quit. I can't go much longer either. So
well, Kent, I appreciate you coming in
the morning where you are, John. Is it?
It's 3:26 here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Kent, you've been in here for an hour and a half before John showed up. So
Yeah.
I know
I'm
you did.
sorry about that, guys.
It's all good, John. It's all good. Kent, you have a wonderful night, and if you need, I can send you a recording of my voice to put you to sleep. Sound good?
Okay.
All right. God bless you, Kent.
John, come to Dinosaur Adventureland. We'll give you a tour and put you up, and you have a wonderful time here. Come visit.
If you're paying my flight, I'll come.
Woo. We'll pay for your food and utilities after you get here. That's the best we can do. All right. Thank you.
Well, in many ways, he's not a bad fellow, is he? He's got some sort of humor and warmth about him, but he's just so incredibly ignorant that he thinks that he can argue a case when all he does every time he opens his mouth is he reveals another level of ignorance. He doesn't even know how cars are made or how nervous systems work. And the whole thing is just ludicrous. But I mean, go to Dr. Dino's theme park and have fun, and tell him best wishes from me. I think we'll call it a day there, Steve, don't you? Because it's we've been going an hour and 37 minutes. So do you want to play the outro? We haven't really got one specifically because it would have a rolling credits, wouldn't it, with a guest, but we don't have that. So should we just play the intro, the little green intro as an outro?
Yeah, I like
Thanks for watching, everyone.
Bye.
And don't forget that tomorrow we have, actually it probably won't be loaded up tomorrow, but we're recording Global Atheist News Review. Unlike the news, which is a report, a review is where opinionated people get to say what they think, their views of the news. So look out for that on FreeThought Productions channel. Thank you. Bye-bye. How long have I got to do this?
I'm checking.